Hello, Julia here. It's been a while since I've made a live video, so I am feeling kind of nervous. Um, in all honesty, I've kind of been in hiding for the last 2 months or so, had a bit of a shame attack, if you will, which I'm not going to explain in this video what I mean by that, but it will certainly be a topic in a further video. God, okay. So my intention for this video is to speak from my heart, to be heart-centered, and to teach people something that I wish I had known earlier on in my life. And I recognize now why I could not have possibly known that until this exact moment. And I'm okay with that. I'm very grateful for the lessons that I had learned, and I understand more why things are the way that they are. Whew. And so this is just me kind of breaking the ice for myself. I can't say that this video specifically will have as much details and content in it as other ones will, but this is something that I feel like for my own sanity, my own mental health, I need to start talking about this, because for an embarrassingly long amount of time, I thought I was going crazy. Like, I had no idea what was going on in my life, and I am pretty sure that there are other people out in the world that are experiencing something similar or have experienced something similar and didn't really know who they could talk to or how they could talk about it. And actually, the articulation part is very specific to this, because it is sometimes hard to talk about, because it's hard to identify what the specific behaviors are that need to be discussed. And so, before I really dive into what the main subject is here that we're talking about, although I know I already mentioned it in the title, so what this video is not, it's not placing blame on anyone, it's not naming anyone, and it's not condoning anyone's behavior. Because what I want you as the listener to be able to take away from this is a feeling of empowerment, a feeling of, okay, this is my responsibility, this is what I can do in this situation, and this is how this can help me. This is a teaching tool. I would love to teach you so that you do not have to experience the same things that I got to experience in my life. And what I am specifically referring to is along the spectrum of and within the realm of codependency and narcissistic abuse. So, one misconception about these two aspects that I really want to clear up for people is that narcissism, those who have narcissistic personality disorder, this actually is on the same spectrum of codependency. It's actually one way that codependency expresses itself. So what you would typically find is that a person who displays characteristics of codependency, they are actually very heavy into like the people pleasing and the what Pete Walker referred to as the fawn response. So they like very heavily want people to like them. They are maybe considered a little more docile. They are often the ones that people would turn to if they want something done for them, because they are agreeable. They are high in agreeableness. But what this ends up attracting are people who like to take advantage of other people. So when you look at the line of codependency and narcissism, if codependency is the fawn response, and what I mean by that is the other term I've heard used is like tend and befriend. So in order to avoid some kind of trauma or traumatic experience. We have what is typically known as like the fight or flight. There's also the freeze and then the fawn response. So in people who have a more abusive mentality, they tend to take on the fight response. So they are looking for victims, but they're looking for people whose boundaries they can push. They are offensive by nature, and they tend to attract to them people who are more docile or on the codependent side of things, which I realize can be confusing because, again, it's the same spectrum. It's not like a different spectrum. And when I say this, the line that we're referring to is actually low self-esteem. So this is the core, like there's a shame wound, a core wound that people who will see this on the negative side of things, they tend to put others above themselves because they have such low self-esteem. They tend to put others on a pedestal. They will put others above themselves because their self-esteem is so low. The converse of this is that what you will also see is people who, because they have such a low self-esteem, will actually put themselves above other people and see others as being beneath them, which can be confusing because you might look at that behavior and see, oh, they're so confident, they're so like maybe full of themselves, or they are very good at like appearing as though they are just confident, but it actually still can come from the same place if it is displaying itself as like grandiosity or a sense of entitlement, because it's actually covering up that very core shame wound, that low self-esteem. It's almost like a overcompensation. They don't want you to know that they feel low self-esteem or that they have insecurities in themselves, but we all do. So they'll actually overcompensate for this by trying to like essentially dominate other people. And even though I said the word dominate, the word that came to mind was like, not cultivate, but kind of. It's like they actually try to take over. Oh my gosh, what is that word? Like, yeah, essentially like just take over other people's mentalities. It's like they see themselves as being the best that there is, like they are the standard to live up to. And so they almost try to convert other people to their way of thinking. Yeah, so I'll get back to that at a different time. But the other important thing to note is that everyone has narcissistic traits. Everyone has narcissistic traits. And this is important for our survival because if we didn't have these traits, we would likely not stand up for ourselves. We would not express ourselves. We would not do the things that we need to do in life in order to survive. So it is very much a survival instinct, but it's also necessary for us to have these traits. Where it begins to get into the problematic side of things is if a person has, well, all 9 of those traits, and if they are using it as a way to exploit other people. So if they are manipulating other people, bullying other people, pressing other people's boundaries for their own self-gain, this is when it gets to be maladaptive, but also harmful for other people to experience. So part of the reason that I feel so called to share this is because I had an experience of this in my life that was right under my nose and I couldn't see it. Because I wanted to believe that there is a good in everyone. I wanted to believe that there are kind people in the world. I wanted to believe that people in their hearts actually want to help other people. And it hadn't really occurred to me that this might not actually be the case, that some people see other people's goodness as something to be exploited. And this was a hard lesson that I had to learn in my own life, but in all honesty, I'm very grateful that I did. And I really hope that this message that I'm sharing with you is in no way relevant to your life. But honestly, based on what I've seen over the last 4 years, I do not know a single person in the world right now who has not in some way, shape, or form been a victim of narcissistic abuse. And this is why I think that this is so important that we begin to learn about what this is, that we begin to see the signs for what they are and understand what that means. Because even in my own experience, I started to see the signs and I started to piece things together, but I still had this mentality of like, oh, this person's going to change. Like, they want to change. But that's the thing about abusers. That is actually the key thing about abusers, is that they don't want to change. And I was under a false premise that if an abuser does enough emotional healing or trauma healing, that they will begin to see things in a new light. But I have now come to understand that abusers don't necessarily become abusers because they have been abused. That's kind of a myth. It's actually a very different mechanism in the brain that causes a person to be abusive. And so when we're looking at a person who is in therapy, processing their emotions, doing a lot of emotional healing, this can often be like a false way that they manipulate people into believing that they will change. And the interesting thing about this is that abusers often focus a lot on their own emotions. They focus a lot on their own experience because they are often the center of their reality. And the way that an abuser changes isn't by focusing on their emotions, isn't by healing their traumas, because in all honesty, they are already very focused on themselves. They are very focused on their own emotions, and they often use their own emotions to manipulate and exploit other people. The way that abusers change is by recognizing and acknowledging the abusive behaviors, such as the sense of entitlement, the grandiose sense of self, the tendency to exploit other people, the little to no empathy or remorse that they may experience. And these things generally are only addressed in programs specific to abusive behavior. So if a person's going to therapy and they're talking about their emotions, like, this is not necessarily going to help them change. It has to be focused on the abusive behaviors themselves. But this is where it becomes problematic because, again, most abusers see those aspects of themselves as being beneficial because it does help them to have power, to have control over people. And so they often don't want to change them. And that's why it is so hard to get a narcissist to change. This is why it's so hard to get someone who is abusive to change, because they just don't want to. Yeah. So I really hope that in me expressing this, you have just a greater sense of awareness. And it's really funny because when I first got into psychology, when I had first attended university, I was really passionate about relationships. I thought I wanted to be a relationship therapist. But I was just fascinated by this idea of psychopathy and this idea of narcissism. And I didn't understand why at the time or how these two areas were related. But I very much am seeing the threads now, and I very much understand just how naive I was at the time, but also how easy it is to be manipulated. And unless we know specifically what to look for, I think this happens way more than we are aware of. So, my sole intention here is to just bring some information, to bring some awareness so that you can either recognize this for yourself in your own life. Maybe you're in a relationship, maybe it's like your boss at work, maybe it's someone that you interact with, a family member, and you'll start to recognize the signs because you'll think that you're going crazy. You'll often feel like it's your fault that the relationship isn't working. You'll often feel like things just don't make sense. You feel confused and you're doing a lot of things to change your behavior, but then things overall aren't really changing. And so these are all signs that you may be experiencing some kind of abuse that is under the radar. You don't quite know how to put your finger on it, don't quite know how to explain it to other people. And so I really hope, I don't hope because I don't want you to be experiencing this, but if you are experiencing this, I really want you to know that you're not alone, and that one of the biggest and best ways to start to move past this is to remove the shame. So when you are being abused by someone, there is necessarily an aspect of shamelessness that the abuser is taking on because of that sense of entitlement. They feel that it is their right to abuse other people. And so they take on this aspect of not feeling ashamed of their own behavior because they think they have the right to infringe on other people's boundaries, to push other people's boundaries. And so you, as the victim, necessarily take on that aspect of their shame because they have rejected it in themselves. And this is what I was experiencing a lot of. I know I said I wasn't going to get to it, but apparently I did anyway, of the shame attack. So if you are experiencing a lot of shame in a relationship with someone, and maybe it's because you think oh, I feel ashamed that I've allowed myself to experience this, or you feel ashamed of the way that the other person is painting you, I just encourage you to really start to check in with how valid that is, and if there is an aspect of that may be carried or may be projected onto you that is not yours to carry. So, I think I'm going to end that here. I actually said a little more than I thought I was going to say. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really, really hope that, I don't know, just be in your heart, know that you're stronger than you are, and that you can be empowered in any situation. And actually, one thing that I will end on is to note that as much as there are people that are in the world right now who bully others, and they will always exist. There will always be bullies in the world. And as the recovering codependent, it is your responsibility to begin to step up and stand up for yourself, because no one is going to come and save you other than yourself. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, but it is honestly the thing that could very well save your life. So if that means talking to a friend, if that means leaving a relationship, getting a different job, whatever that may mean for you, just know that you have that strength and you have that power within you, and that whatever your situation is, you are able to overcome it. So much peace, much love. Thank you so much for tuning in. You are a beautiful human. And I hope you really recognize and acknowledge that God and that love that is within you. All right. Bye for now, friends.